This is OmnusI. Just thought you'd be interested in seeing what a small career's worth of gaming can bring you as far as notes, old characters, papers, etc. I basically have collected just about everything that I've used gaming wise since, I first started in college and I've carried it all with me all this time. These stacks of papers represent the bulk of all the campaign notes, characters that I've played, weird ideas, and assorted other things that I've either encountered or played in during those many years, all the way back from 1992. Even a few things that even predate that. So today, I thought I'd show you this before I get on to showing you a few other things. This is a special treat just for people who are following OmnusI. This will not be advertised anywhere on Facebook or anywhere else. So, settle in. I feel like talking.
Hi, I'm OmnusI, and you're catching me at kind of a vulnerable time right now. I'm cleaning the lair a bit, getting ready for tomorrow's Lair of OmnusI. I'm also feeling rather nostalgic, and I've been poring through some of my old things. I have dreams of someday organizing it all. I've purchased folders and notebooks and filing cabinets and things to that effect. But every time I get started, it has never failed, that I find a few things here, there, and everywhere that kind of draw me back. Since my head's a little bit lighter, you notice the beard was just getting a little too much. So I thought, since I was doing some videos about my advice on how to, start off into the hobby of gaming, especially as a game master, you might be interested in how I myself got to this point. If you aren't interested, well, I'll see you in the next video. But if you are, especially if you know me outside of these videos, and you were at one point a participant in one of my games, you might enjoy this walk back through my halls of my memory. So, happily, a few things did survive my early gaming career. But first of all, I'm going to frame it out with a short story about how I started out. My first brush with role-playing games, way before it was my hobby, my parents were given a box set Dungeons and Dragons way back in, best my recollection, 1982, 83, maybe 84. I was quite young. The ludicrous thing is, the aunt and uncle who got that present for my parents obviously did not know what Dungeons and Dragons were. They probably only really knew that my mother enjoyed fantasy. I started reading, I came upon her while she was reading the Lord of the Rings series, and I asked her to read it to me, and she did. And eventually I took to reading it aloud with her, which I can still remember, even though I was only 3 and 4 at the time. That's how I cut my teeth. Right alongside of Dr. Seuss and everything, I was reading about hobbits and dragons and gold. Some funny things I still remember. Learning the difference between a brazier and a brazier. Brazier sure looks a lot like brazier, but when I found out what a brazier was, well, let's just say I remember that lesson quite clearly, even though, again, I was very young. But again, when I was around 8, 9, maybe 10 by my recollection, they got the Dungeons and Dragons box set. Now, I'm pretty sure my aunt and uncle thought it was just a board game. My father, God bless his soul, good man, not blessed with a great amount of imagination. And he certainly wasn't interested in fantasy. He never discouraged me in my interest, but it wasn't something that was of interest to him. He liked his, baseball, football, and he had a social life and enjoyed doing things with his friends and everything too. But he was mostly about work and supporting the family and everything. He didn't really have any interest in fantasy. I was 8. If I was 8, my brother was 5 or 6. We weren't ready back then. But I found that box set one time. And I remember opening it up and pouring through it. Now, I may have, cut some of my early reading teeth on Tolkien. But reading Gygax in pure unfiltered form was just a little bit more than I could handle. I loved the monster descriptions. I loved the art. I could not necessarily wrap my head around all the abbreviations that dotted it. EPs, XPs, GPs, D4, D6. For the most part, I'm stuck to reading what entertained me. The synopsis of a gameplay example. Reading about the different monsters and things. And I devoured that. But I never played it back then. It was a near miss. I was fascinated with the stuff that I'd read. I didn't attach a great deal of significance to it. Can't say I remember the dice from it, which is the kind of thing these days I would love to have had that again. But that's since come and gone. It was lost, thrown out in a move or some such, which is sad. It really is. When I'm feeling nostalgic, I do feel a bit of sadness for what I've lost, but I do take comfort in how much I do have here. So that was my first encounter with role-playing games. Again, just as an observer of the books, without having any real experience. I then learned video games. My father indulged me probably. Some would say more than was healthy. When the Atari 2600 came out, we got one of those. Before that, we had Pong in the old fake wood grain with the 2 paddles on either end, and my brother and I would play that from time to time. It wasn't entirely engaging. It was just a taste of what was going to come. And when the Atari showed up, yeah, I played that a lot. I do remember we stockpiled a pretty good selection of games. Combat, Space Invaders. I loved the Activision games. I got really into those. A number of them I qualified for different badges for. I remember Pitfall, Mega Mania, Laser Command. There were some good ones. We had all the classics, Space Invaders. One of my fondest memories is my father and I one time playing Asteroids together, flipping the board numerous times. I still to this day don't know how he got so good at it. I did, I believe, beat him, although I can't say 100%. We flipped it several times and just, yeah, it was a good time. So that was video games. And of course, after the Atari, my family life went through a little bit of a flux. Eventually, it was just my dad, my brother, and I for a while. And we got the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, with that, I got my first taste of what a role-playing game was more similar to in video game form with The Legend of Zelda. When that came out, I still remember it. Gold cartridge. It was amazing. You got a sword right away, and you ended up fighting monsters that looked very much like goblins and ogres. Octoroks were different, but, they were monsters. And you eventually got a magical sword, which was really cool. Bows, boomerangs, bombs. Bombs are cool. Magical torches, wands, good fantasy fare. So, that engaged my interest, and I'm glad to say I got that fairly quickly. Played the daylights out of it. Through video games, I became friends with one of my classmates who lived very close to me, just down a steep hill. His name was Gary. And he was kind of a social outcast, much like I was kind of a nerdy social outcast. Gary was cooler than I was. I didn't fit in all that well, and I was pretty introverted back in high school. So, with Gary, we found out that we had a common interest in video games. He had a good collection. He enjoyed the ones I had. I enjoyed the ones he had. We swapped. It was good times. I still remember playing RC Pro-Am in his little attic room in the sweltering hot summer. This was back in the summer of my soon-to-be freshman year. And we played for quite a while, and we did cool things. And then Gary went off to school at a seminary far away, and he was gone for a year. When I talked to him, he told me about how he found role-playing games. There was a number of students there who were playing, and he befriended. I became a very good resource for him to make friends. So when he brought that back that summer, I went and I myself started looking into these role-playing games. They sounded fascinating. It didn't take very much, honestly. I started back in the day with basic Dungeons and Dragons, which would eventually look like these. Now, I've repurchased these. This one is not the original Player's Handbook. The DM's book stood up quite a bit more because it wasn't referenced nearly as much, but I do still have the original Player's Handbook. This is the state that it's in. We ripped the cover, fell off, it vanished. These pages feel incredibly thin and worn from being flipped through, referenced, read, devoured. This was the Player's Manual by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, revised by Frank Menser, illustrations by Elmore and Easley. This is classic stuff. Copyrighted 1974, 77, 78, 81, 83. So, yeah. This was one of the granddaddies of them all. The basic Dungeons and Dragons was simplified, which made it easy to get a hold of and absorb. It had a player's handbook, which was written in an entertaining fashion, which easily captured the imagination. And it didn't introduce concepts too quickly. They explained everything thoroughly. It wasn't written at the same high level that the advanced Dungeons and Dragons or the original Dungeons and Dragons sets were. I did not come from a background of wargaming. I was a kid who came up with a background of fantasy literature and video gaming. So, but working with Gary, we devoured Dungeons and Dragons. I made dungeons after dungeons using those rules. Back when I started, it wasn't about the big meta campaign. It was about creating a cool scenario, putting my own unique spin on it. I kind of had a silly spin. For example, one of the things I recommended early on, and I still remember this, was tweaking creatures to make them more your own. They had a rock ape, and one of the suggestions they had was giving him a mohawk and some drumsticks and making him a rock and roll ape. And I pounced on that. There are any number of creatures that I redid in a kind of a silly, offhand manner. I did make some great dungeons. I had a wonderful pyramid. I kind of had the startings of a mega dungeon going. Most of them were very episodic. I did not have story content to it. It was really just me and Gary at the time. My brother didn't have a great deal of interest, even though I tried numerous times to get him into playing. Considering he lived with me, or I at least saw him a lot, and that just didn't happen. So it was basically me and Gary. Another thing that we did together was we had an interest in professional wrestling back in the glory days with Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage and so on. We loved the video games, but I created, and I don't know if I have it here right now. One of these days I'll bring it up, but it's in a spiral notebook like this that survived since 88, I think. Yeah. And I basically created a wrestling role-playing game. It was very basic. It was loosely based on, it had an initiative system, like kind of like Dungeons and Dragons, where you took turns beating on each other. You had classes. You had the high flyers. You had the heavy hitters. You had tag team specialists and things. And I created this large volume of different maneuvers that you could try. They had different bonuses to hit. They had set amounts of damage, which you could increase if you were really strong or really heavy. It actually, in our little circle of friends, well, we'll get into that in a sec. When Gary and I were making it, it was just something we had fun doing. And another thing we did was one of the games that he played was called Top Secret, which is a TSR game about being a super spy. And we were all about super spies. We loved super spies. So we tried to reverse engineer it from his memory. Now that was interesting because, well, I've never designed a game before, and all I had experience was basic Dungeons and Dragons. At that time, I had moved up beyond just the basic. I had also gotten the expert set, which I still have, again, sans the cover, but it is, for the most part, still pretty much intact. You could play up to 10th level with these books. So there's that. Now, of course, I also have repurchased that one, the blue covered expert rulebook. I also have several copies of the compendium that tied all of these things together, which is very handy. If I was going to bring somebody into the game, this is certainly one way I'd consider doing it, especially if I wanted to bring them into a structured game like Dungeons and Dragons. So, again, that one's worn thin, seen a lot of use. But when we recreated Top Secret, I had never played Top Secret or had a lot of experience, and a lot of the mechanics for the game were different. So I'm happy to say, too, that I have recently purchased Top Secret, found it at a half-price bookstore, and got it, and been happily devouring that as well. Kind of looking back and remembering what we created. It was a crazy over-the-top game, not very well balanced. I still remember our secret agents running around with a turkey leg or a cast iron frying pan as weaponry, because the melee weapons all did about the same damage. So one botched encounter in exploring somebody's mansion, big turkey drumstick was there. One of our characters picked it up, and since it did as much damage as a sword, just bashed our way through an encounter. It was crazy fun. We specialized a lot. We liked vehicles. We loved vehicles that could transform and had hidden gadgets and weaponry and stuff. So he had brought over some things from the people that he had played in at the seminary, and we kind of recreated some of that. So we had a very interesting little game that we cooked up based on percentile success, failure chances. Most of it was cobbled together from what he reconstructed in his imagination from having played for a while. So that was good. That was my first real taste of role playing, and that we spent a ton of time that year after our freshman year of high school, constantly talking about role playing, developing things, bouncing ideas off each other, playing in little snatches here and there. It was really just us. There wasn't anybody else that we had around us who really were into that. I did have some other friends that I did other things with. I wasn't a social pariah. Again, mostly most of my friends were not the most popular people. One of my friends, Joel, was incredibly intelligent, almost intimidatingly so. He and I thought we got to be fairly good friends, but all my high school friends kind of all fell out after high school for the most part, unfortunately. Every once in a while I'll still get contact from one or the other, but mostly that's a part of my life that's gone. I'm not the same person I was back then. They wouldn't recognize me, and I didn't care for a whole lot of them anyhow. At least my classmates. My friends I liked. A lot of the other ones, there are some scars. So, at any rate, after that freshman, the summer after the freshman year, I decided to go to the seminary with him and follow along because no, it was scary. I had never really been away from home, and here this seminary was in Wisconsin. I'm from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan originally, so yes, I am a Youper. So we went to the seminary. I got introduced to all of his friends, and I ended up making my personal best friend. His name was Vince. A heck of a guy. Even from our earlier days where we were all kind of in high school, kind of figuring things out as we went, Vince was good with just about everybody. He wasn't too nerdy for the cool crowd. He wasn't too cool for us nerdy types, although he did very strongly fit in with us. He became my go-to for all my crazy ideas and games. I think he probably attended more of those games back in the day than anybody. In addition, the first one that I met kind of outside the circle was a transfer named Toby. Met up with him when he had a Dragonlance campaign out on his desk, and I'm like, oh, you play Dungeons and Dragons? I play Dungeons and Dragons. Now, another thing that happened, too, over that summer was that I, after Gary, also got into with another group of older students who had been playing Dungeons and Dragons for a bit. They played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So through a torrid summer and a little bit of my 8th grade, I played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons with those guys. I didn't own any of the books or anything like that, but I made my first AD&D character through that, who I will show you at some point. And we went through a lot of different modules, and I have a lot of great stories from them that I like to dwell upon. So I told him about my exploits in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, since he had an AD&D module. And for grins, he decided that, we both decided that it would be fun for me to take my character up against it. It turned out that was the adventure that basically took place inside, if you're familiar with Dragonlance, Lord Soth's castle. For the life of me, I can't remember what it is right now. Something guard. All their stuff was guard. For those fallen Solamnic knights. Which kind of didn't go very well because we had different opinions on how magic resistance worked. I'm playing a cleric, primarily spellcaster, and my stuff was not working because he thought that anti-magic was an absolute, which meant my stuff was just bouncing off of the Death Knights like it wasn't even worth bringing out the guns for. So that was interesting. I ended up escaping because I had a magical cornucopia that could generate food, kind of along the similar lines to what a decanter of endless water could crank out. So I just filled hallways full of food, let the Death Knights wade through that, and skipped out when it was too obvious that I wasn't going to be able to do that by myself. But we became friends through that, and with him and Vince as the core of my group. Sadly, Gary and I kind of fell apart a bit. He had some anger issues, and he had a few issues. I had issues too, don't get me wrong. I wasn't a saint. But he eventually left the seminary and kind of left me stranded in a way. So I clung the harder to my friends. That's also when I got the kernels of a campaign in my head. And I found this old folder, just entitled The Party D&D, that I had. At various points, numerous people played in this game. Primarily it was Vince and Toby, but we had a few other people. Another person, Ray. Joe. I'm not using last names to protect the guilty or if you are these people, you know who you are, and I thank you for having been a part of my game and my story. There was the characters were fun. I mean, we were in high school. We were sophomores in high school. Just kind of feeling the waters. To put things in context, the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon was on TV. It was 1990. Vince's main character was Aragon Strongheart. Strongheart was a character in Dungeons and Dragons, and Aragon is pretty close to Aragorn, so you got where that came from. Banadin was a character from a game book series called Lone Wolf that we both loved. And if you ever have a chance, I strongly suggest playing it if you never have. It's very good. Ray had Shorty. He was a halfling. Yeah. Sean had a character named Toll Buckminster. Sean did not get along well in the group. He had a guy who was pretty thoroughly chaotic and slightly evil, so he got kicked out of the group when there was a rift. His character name was Toll Buckminster, who, as far as I know, is a mathematician, a rather famous one. He found it in a math book. We had a character named Rainbow Bright, later just shortened to Bright. We were guys. We didn't go for Rainbow Bright as much. So yeah, lots of good characters. I also imported my character from my AD&D game into that, and I created several DM NPCs. The campaign itself was a rather lengthy one. It not that we played for multiple years. We only had that 1 year that I was at the seminary. I was asked not to return for a variety of reasons. The one I'm pinning most of the fault on was telling my spiritual advisor in confidence that I play Dungeons and Dragons and I didn't see what all the fuss was about. Now, on top of that, our little group became known as the Dorm Dwellers, and we were kind of we didn't do anything with sports. We didn't go out and support the teams. And looking back on that, I kind of regret that. We could have taken some time out to be better people. And I got sick during a big thing, our St. Mary's Day festival, and I basically went to the infirmary and didn't tell anybody, so they just thought I'd skipped out on everything. So that didn't look so good for me. So they asked me not to come back. That's okay. That's all in the past. I don't hold them much ill will. But because we were at a seminary, we lived in a dorm, and we were all together, we would play a rather obscene amount of time. It's amazing sometimes that we actually got homework done. On top of prayer, compulsory meals, we would fill our every Saturday with probably about 11 to 12 hours of gaming. We would sneak away to different places so that we weren't too close to people who would disapprove. And when we wanted to play with people from other classes who weren't invited into our dorms, we had to go to exotic locations. Sometimes we would go away into the halls the classes would normally be held in, off hours. We would go into the hallway in front of their auditorium. Sometimes we would go into the cafeteria or one of the lounges. Every place had a little bit different aura to it. Some of those games were really intense and really cool. One time we went up to by the astronomy tower, which that would have been a really good place to have had regular sessions. But we did the vast majority of it in our dorms because we were all sophomores at the time for the major campaign that I ran. I became friends with other people outside of the classroom. I would have to say that gaming really gave me that social outlet that I desperately, desperately needed, and it helped me to survive in an environment that all of a sudden was very strange and very alien and very bizarre. The people there were nice enough. I mean, it was a seminary. We were all, kind of in the same team. But there were kids. I got introduced to cultures that I never dreamed of. Kids from Chicago playing house music. I never heard Two Live Crew. But sure enough, somebody was blasting stuff that I still, to this day, can't believe they got away with playing at a seminary. I met people from Saudi Arabia who went to that seminary specifically. Nice people, kept to themselves, but really nice, decent people. Yeah, rich, you know, but they couldn't spend their money, and I just knew them as decent people, nice people. Sonny was a great guy. I was on the same work team with. He was just a nice guy. I never really thought of him as anything that different. But the people that I gamed with became the nucleus of my center of friends. Out of that, I really only took one person out with me. I got to be really good friends with Vince, of course. When I was asked not to leave, it was pretty shattering. I cried like a baby when they told me. Still remember that very clearly and very painfully. That summer, I went to visit him for a week, and we played a lot of games on that week. That was a lot of fun. His folks are wonderful. His brothers and sisters are wonderful. I had a lot of fun with that. But between that campaign that I never got to finish, I was planning on going into the next year and continuing on, but that didn't happen. So it kind of got stuck. The group was fairly high level. By that time, I had moved up into the compendium, or the companion set, which I haven't used nearly as much because, well, this is for 10th and up to, I believe, 25th level. More complicated rules and fun stuff. And, like I said, I never got to finish that. But it did give me a good framework to start with thinking about how to entertain disparate people who all have different interests. I got to see some interesting things with the dark side of allowing your hobby to become your obsession. One of the people that I played with, his name was Luis, got too carried away. I mean, he would constantly be badgering me about stuff at the game to the point where I loved gaming, but even I would say, dude, can you back off a little bit? He was really behind my wrestling game. As a matter of fact, he even went into the wood shop and he constructed a wrestling ring that we could use as a play area for the wrestlers to help. And I was just blown away because he did a really good job. He even made me a pencil box, I think I still have, and gave it to me. He was very appreciative of the time we gave him. But we eventually said, you have to step back. We can't let your grades are getting destroyed. You're thinking about gaming non-stop. He was the worst scenario I'd ever seen involving gaming. And it was kind of scary. And I made sure that from that point on, I never let it get control of me like that. Ever. Some would say I still spend too much time doing it, but quite honestly, the guiltiest I feel about it is that it gives me one night out of the week that I do take away from my wife and son to spend a little time with my friends. Honestly, I think for the most part, we do pretty good with it. So, I'm not away from home. I'm not out drinking and what have you. So, my wife knows where she can find me if she needs me, and we get along pretty well. And we understand that it's a game. We don't take it too seriously. We do it for the fun of getting together. So, I think that's a good place to stop. That is my roots. That is how I started this whole thing. As early back as the early 80s, my first brush up against Dungeons and Dragons, and then really it got a hold of me in the summer of '89, and yeah, that was a good time. Lots of gaming, lots of crazy stuff, trying all different kinds of things. At the seminary, I ran into not only Top Secret and Dungeons and Dragons and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I had the basic Dungeons and Dragons books. That's what we use instead of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I also found the rules less cluttered and obtuse. It was just easier to use, and it was just as much fun to me. So my friends never complained. We played Star Wars D6 system from West End Games. That was a lot of fun. Brushed into Paranoia while I was there. Although I never got to play it, I heard about it, and some interesting things. That next summer, when I went to stay with Vince for the week, is when I first bought my very own game book that I bought myself, which was the 3rd edition GURPS rulebook. I was fascinated from what I'd heard about GURPS. One system that I can run anything with, and it actually worked. But we'll get on to that next time. So, this is a look behind the DM screen. I am OmnusI. I hope my tales have entertained you, certainly, at one of many paths that a person can come into the hobby with. This is all 100% true, unvarnished, one-take stuff, coming just off the cuff. For those of you who may watch, if Vince, you get a hold of this and watch it, I hope you get a smile and a chuckle out of it at those old days that we had together, as well as any of the others. I've missed several people that I had played with. Too many names to mention. Some of them were just one shot. Some of them were not as memorable. But thank you for listening. And this is just a bonus snippet for those of you who've chosen to pay any attention to OmnusI. So thank you very much. And hopefully I can get some of this organized and give you another taste of what my gaming life has been like up to that point. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful night.